So at this point, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our presenter today. Cindy Goldrich has a master's in education, is an advanced certified ADHD coach, teacher, trainer, and parenting specialist. She works with parents, teachers, and related services professionals for the education, treatment, and support of children with ADHD and executive function challenges. As the founder of PTS Coaching, she created and facilitates the highly acclaimed workshop series, Calm and Connected, Parenting Children with ADHD, and accompanying support groups. Cindy also provides individual parent coaching on Long Island and at the Hallowell Center in New York City and nationwide, as well as live interactive webinars. Even with all of this, Cindy has found time to write a book. She is the author of 8 Keys to Parenting Children with ADHD, which helps people better understand ADHD and offers parenting perspectives and techniques to dramatically improve family relationships. Cindy's expertise is enhanced by her certifications and memberships in many organizations, in fact, too many to even list here. I encourage you to visit her site, www.ptscoaching.com, to read and learn more about Cindy and her staff. At this point, I am honored to introduce to all of you Cindy Goldrich. So Cindy, if you would please share your screen.
Better. Okay, and can you see my screen okay?
On. Yes, looks good.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I really do appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to share today with you about executive function and ADHD, or is it just being a kid? I think you did a great introduction of who I am, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that, except to say that many of you out there, I'm sure, are not really familiar with what the world of ADHD coaching is. So I just want to share with you that coaching is a profession in the world of ADHD that's been around for about 20 years. Coaching is really a collaborative partnership that's designed to help people make the changes they want. Coaching is not therapy. I do actually collaborate with therapists. We work side by side. But as a coach, I don't focus on the why. I focus more on the what now. So we're shifting the problems into the goals. So that's a little bit about what coaching is. And if anyone wants to know more about coaching, by all means, feel free to get in touch with me. So today, in terms of an overview of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to be looking at what are the signs of ADHD, when and how to seek a diagnosis, and what can you do now to help. I know we have a poll question. If you want to go ahead and do that poll question, we can do that. Okay, so we see the results there. Just to give you a sense, it looks like 50% of you have kids between the ages of 7 and 12, and 50% between the ages of 13 and 18. Okay. So I'm going to start by just explaining what ADHD is. Now, many of you may still be calling it ADD. I know that growing up, a lot of times we just talked about these as the kids who were hyperactive, impulsive, the troublemakers, the class clown, the lazy kids, the unmotivated kids, maybe the girl who was just twirling her hair in the back of the class, the space cadets. We had a lot of nice names for this. I don't particularly like the name that we have now, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But until we change it, that's what we have. Many of us in the field don't really look at this as a disorder as much as we look at it as a difference. And I think it's really important, the perspective that you have in looking at all of this. Until 1987, it was all called ADD, right? Now we call it ADHD. It is a neurodevelopmental disorder of the brain's prefrontal the brain's self-management system, you have to see several noticeable inattentive or hyperactive impulsive symptoms that have to be evident in 2 or more settings. Now, it can show up very differently at home and at school. Sometimes parents will tell me that they've gone to school and they say, oh, I'm having such trouble with my child, and the teacher will just look at them and say, well, he's doing just fine in school. The thing is, it doesn't always show up the same way, and sometimes the kids can be so bright that they are compensating beautifully in school, but that doesn't mean they're not going to hit a wall at some point. So we really do want to see what ADHD is. You can see it clinically. You can diagnose it by age 4. You do have to see symptoms evident by age 12, and we'll talk about what that impact is in terms of diagnosing adults in a few minutes. But so we do need to see it by age 12, which means that this is something you are born with. You don't develop ADHD. It's not because you ate, you gave your kid too much sugar, and it's not because you let them watch video games too much. It's not because of how you parented them. It is a true disorder. And largely it's hereditary. I would look at the upper end of that statistic, right, closer to the 50% range of children with ADHD have at least one parent with ADHD. What's the implication of that? Well, as I tell teachers all the time when I do teacher trainings, you may be saying to the parent, Mrs. Smith, Johnny's having a really hard time organizing himself. Could you go home and organize him? And Mrs. Smith is thinking, well, who's coming home and organizing me? As parents sit in my workshop, they start to see, wow, this really was maybe me when I was a kid, and they just kind of hadn't put the two things together. So yes, it is a very, very highly heritable condition. The rate is about 11% for school-age children. That's according to the CDC. That stands for the Centers for Disease Control. So knowing that, that's why it became so important to me to go into the schools, because most of these kids are in the mainstream classroom. Some of them are in special education. Many of them have IEPs or 504s, but might still be in the mainstream. But what I have found through the years is that teachers don't necessarily know much more about ADHD than parents do, unless it's impacted their own world or unless they've gone for additional professional development. It's not in their initial teacher training. The rate is higher for boys than girls, but it does present differently, and I'm going to show you a little bit how differently it presents in the girls. And it is a chronic disorder. What does that mean? Well, we don't know whether people really outgrow it or whether they just learn how to modify their lives, but we do know that for many people, the symptoms are going to continue right through their whole lives. And again, ADHD is real. You can see it on a brain scan. I never suggest spending the thousands of dollars it would cost to get a brain scan, because it's not going to give you any more information that a good diagnosis will give you. And I'm going to talk in a few minutes about what that diagnosis looks like. But just to give you a sense of what ADHD really is, imaging studies show differences in the structure and the activity of the brain when people have ADHD and when people don't. Now, before I show you these next few parts, I don't want anyone sitting out there worried, oh my God, it's a brain difference. It's a brain difference. That doesn't mean lesser than. That doesn't mean it's a problem. It means it's a difference, okay? There are many, and I'm sure you know many of them, brilliant people, successful people out there who have ADHD. It hasn't stopped them. So there is a consistent pattern of below normal levels of the chemicals dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin in the brain's prefrontal cortex. That's what it really is, okay? There's a difference there. And also, the prefrontal cortex is thinner and it matures more slowly. Now note, it doesn't mean it doesn't mature, it just matures more slowly. So this way, maybe why you have a kid who you're wondering, well, he's so bright, he's so able to do certain things, why is he having such a hard time doing other things? And there appears to be an understimulation in the reward and motivation centers of the brain. And for many of you who are sitting there wondering, wait, what does that mean? The reward and motivation centers of the brain. That may tell you why some of the traditional sticker charts or motivation plans for these kids are just not as effective. In my parenting workshop, we're going to be talking, or we do talk a lot about how to make an effective program and what that really needs to look like. Because we can't just dangle that carrot and expect it's going to work the same for these kids as it may for other kids. In terms of the early signs of ADHD, I'm going to show you what some of the basics are. We've got signs of inattention, which is where they daydream a lot, they have a hard time paying attention, they have a hard time listening, they may be easily distracted from their tasks, they don't follow directions well, they're disorganized, they may lose things, and they just don't want to do things that require the ongoing mental effort. That's going to be your signs of the inattentiveness. Then we have the signs of the hyperactivity, which is, that's where we see that endless energy, right? The often fidgeting and squirming and talking too much. Maybe they, don't want to play quietly or have a harder time playing quietly. They often run around and climb and whatnot. Now, as they get older, you're not going to see quite as much of the overt hyperactivity, but that doesn't mean it's not still there. And then, of course, we have the signs of the impulsivity. This is where you're going to blurt out the answer. You can't wait for things. You have trouble, waiting your turn. You act and you may speak without thinking. You run into the street without looking, which is, for very, very young kids, that could be a real problem. In fact, I've had many parents say, I don't know what to do. My kid just runs out, right? It's not because they don't care. It's the impulsivity. And interrupt kids, interrupt other people. Let's do one more poll question, if we can, right now. And we're really wondering, has your child received a formal diagnosis at this point? Okay. A, if they have, and B, if they haven't. And it looks like all of our attendees have gotten the formal diagnosis. Okay. All right. Well, I'm still going to talk a little bit about what a diagnosis looks like, because from my experience, many people have had a formal diagnosis, but it wasn't necessarily a full and adequate diagnosis. Okay. So before I get to that, I do just want to share that there are the 3 presentations. We used to call this 3 types of ADHD, but as of the latest DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, we call them presentations. We've got the primarily inattentive, we've got the hyperactive and impulsive, and then we have our combined type of ADHD. And I want to share with you a little bit about ADHD in girls and women, because what we're finding in more recent years, as more and more adults are getting diagnosed, that the difference between the rate of boys and girls is not quite as drastic as it's been in the past. Yes, there's still a difference, but it really shows up differently for women. The females tend to display more inattentiveness rather than the hyperactivity and the impulsivity, and they're more likely to internalize their symptoms and become anxious and depressed. And the problem here is that many adults, and I've had this happen right in my workshops, many women have realized, wait a minute, I was always diagnosed with anxiety or depression, and it may actually be ADHD. The symptoms are less likely to be observed by teachers because there's less disruptive behavior. And the females may actually develop better coping strategies than males to mask their symptoms. People ask me why sometimes, and I don't really have a great answer for that, except to say that women do tend to have better coping skills. So if not properly diagnosed and treated, girls with ADHD are going to experience the same problems that the boys do. So it really is important to get that diagnosis. There's another condition that I want to raise your awareness about. There are many physicians who are not as up to date and may themselves not be as aware, but this is a true something that we're really looking at. It's not yet in the DSM, but it's a second disorder of attention. There's a lot of research on this. Here are the 2 working titles. I don't really like either of them. There's sluggish cognitive tempo, or we're calling this a concentration deficit disorder. As I said, it's not yet in the DSM, but these are what some of the symptoms look like. So I'll just leave this up here for a moment to say that these are the kids that may be, the daydreamers, mentally foggy, they're more lethargic, they're underactive, right? They're slow moving, they seem apathetic or lost in their thoughts. It's, a lot of times it was assumed that this was ADHD and attentive type, but in reality this may actually be its own disorder. There are, in terms of adults, the symptoms may be more subtle. I always like to bring this up because the reality is there are many adults who are being diagnosed now. So they may still have trouble getting organized, be extremely distractible, poor listening skills, restless, trouble relaxing, difficulty starting tasks, issues with time management, and may still have angry outbursts and difficulty prioritizing. This is when it's great to have a really skilled ADHD coach who works with adults, because that's someone that can really help them really develop those skills and reach those goals. Let's do our third poll question if we can. And this is where I'm asking, have either of the parents been diagnosed with ADHD? As I said, there is statistically almost 50% is the case. So let's see where we are with this. And remember, a parent may not have been diagnosed with ADHD. I see we have 100%. Okay. So then the question sometimes becomes, is it that the parent hasn't been diagnosed or hasn't been diagnosed yet? Or it may be that it's truly, not them. So in terms of what else can be part of ADHD, now these are not things that can mimic it. These are things that can be part of, okay? You've got emotional regulation. That's that whole ability to manage your frustration, calm yourself. You've got cognitive hyperactivity. You've got sensitivity to the environment, a difficult learning from past experiences, because my parents know time is now and not now, so they're not thinking about what already happened. Difficulty with transitioning from one thought to another, difficulty taking other people's perspectives, often sloppy handwriting, and this is not necessarily an OT issue. Sometimes you'll notice a big difference in a kid's handwriting when they're on and off meds. Difficulty with the writing process itself, tendency toward addictions, difficulty delaying gratification, and boy, a difficult time with tolerating boredom. But beware of the quiet child, because you don't have to be hyperactive to have these impairments. In terms of things that go along with, also we've got learning disabilities. It's a huge issue. I strongly recommend if your child has ADHD that you look and see if there are some coexisting learning disabilities. Tourette's, difficulty falling asleep and or waking up. If you have a child who's having a hard time with sleep issues, on my website, which is PTS Coaching, I'll show you the reference at the end, you will see that there are some articles I've written around that. Bipolar, autism, substance abuse, oppositional defiant disorder, 11 times more likely. And that's why my workshop, my parent workshop, we really deal with a lot of the behavioral aspect of having ADHD. Depression and anxiety. Anxiety is often a huge, huge part of it. So you always want to be on the lookout for that. Let's do our fourth poll question, our last poll question. I want to just get a sense of what is your primary concern. Okay, I know for some of you there's going to be many of them. It's going to be hard for you to decide what it is, but we've got focus, we've got compliance, we've got socializing, and we've got organizing and time management. And it looks like 50% of you are here where your primary concern is compliance and behavior, and that's very understandable, and 50% on socializing. And what's interesting is when you think about what the triangle of ADHD looks like, usually we're talking about the inattentiveness, the hyperactivity, and the impulsivity, and it's not mentioning about the socializing and the compliance and the behavior. But that really is what's at the core of it. So now, before I talk about how to diagnose, I think it's very important to know what can mimic ADHD. I'm just going to show you real quick. Sleep issues, mood disorder, sensory processing disorder, language processing, anxiety. As I said, anxiety can coexist, but sometimes it can be the lead, and sometimes it can really be the main issue. Thyroid condition, Crohn's, hearing loss, severe allergies, pandas. Pandas is another thing that is relatively new in a lot of people's awareness. You have to make sure that the people you're going through the diagnostic workup do know what pandas is. Lyme disease, and I'm going to add my own, which is inappropriate developmental expectations. I think sometimes what we're doing and expecting of the kids is creating a lot of the breakdown. That doesn't mean it's creating the ADHD. It's creating what we are jumping to a conclusion and assuming might be ADHD. What does it feel like? Well, just real briefly, people have explained it that it just feels like, you know, that the streets, you've got the city streets, but what's happening is the traffic light is down and the messages just aren't getting where they need to get. Or it's like Tigger with that boundless energy, or as Dr. Ned Hallowell's famous for saying, kids, you've got an amazing brain, you've got a race car engine for a brain. The problem is you may have bicycle brakes, and that's what's going on. Now, in terms of diagnosing, who can diagnose? Well, you're going to see a lot of different people can diagnose, okay? And there are benefits to each one. There are drawbacks to each one, but really the most important thing I want you to walk away from here is it matters who you go to based on how up-to-date they are in their knowledge. If you're just seeking a basic diagnosis, you may want to go to a psychiatrist or a pediatrician, developmental pediatrician. But if you really wanted to get a full evaluation and look at the impact of education and everything else, then you're going to want to go more toward the neuropsychologist. So these are all the different people that can, but let's look at what it takes to get a proper diagnosis. Because as I said, it's not just who can diagnose, it's making sure that they're expert and current in their knowledge. So an accurate diagnosis must include a medical and a social history of both the child and the family. A lot of people think you can just go to Google and just, you know, do that whole checkoff list, but that's not accurate. And that's not enough, because as I showed you in the previous slides, you must be ruling out other conditions. You must be observing in 2 or more settings, right? In fact, that's one of the other things. You're going to have the physical exam, and you're going to have the neurological assessment to include the screening for hearing, verbal, and motor skills. We really want to rule out anything else that might be going on. And it may include, and I strongly recommend, especially for the school-age children, that you may want to consider having the evaluation for the intelligence, the aptitude, personality traits, or the processing skills. Because it's not just a matter of checking off, okay, it's ADHD and maybe let's do medication. It's about how are we really supporting this kid. Because in terms of treatment, treatment involves a few things. It involves sometimes medication, but it always should include education, parenting education about what ADHD is. Because if parents don't really understand what's underlying the behavior, what's causing some of these challenges, then I always believe that parents parent out of love and logic, but you don't always have the logic and you don't always have the skills to parent a complex child. And that's why I say my Common Connect workshop is really a black belt training for parenting kids. So it's very important that you think about the treatment as not just medication. It could be parent training, it could be coaching, it could be working on the environment itself, it could be collaborating with the teachers. I very often go into schools and do teacher training so the teachers have a better sense of what the challenges are for the child. So it's all of these different things. So in terms of if you suspect that it's ADHD, the things you can do are start writing a log. What are some of the specific examples that are really reflecting your concern? So it's not just this general, you know, oh, he behaves wild or he doesn't pay attention. You want to really give some specific examples. And you want to seek observation from all of the teachers, not just the classroom teacher. You want to ask the music teacher, the art teacher, the gym teacher. See how your child is in other environments. See if there maybe are other explanations for the behavior. But please don't just assume that it's immaturity or gender or motivation or character deficit or bad parenting, okay? And don't ignore that voice in your gut. My philosophy is, and this is the introduction to my book, The 8 Keys, you got to parent the child you have, not the child you thought you'd have, not the child you wish you'd have, not the child you'd have if your mother-in-law got her way, but truly parent the child you have, that unique, wonderful child. So what can you do now? Well, as I said, parent education and coaching is one of the most important interventions. You also can go to look for local meetings. Find your local CHAD chapter. We've got in New York, we've got a Nassau County chapter and a Suffolk County chapter. If you're outside of Long Island, you can go to chad.org and look at their website, and that'll show you where all the different chapters are. It's nice to have face-to-face meetings. It's really nice to have other parents and other adults who really understand what your experience is. A lot of schools have a special education PTA. I strongly recommend you go there because you're going to meet parents who understand your experience and can help you advocate, help you understand what goes on in your own school. There are some websites I'm going to recommend. Of course, I'm going to recommend my own, but I know that on my website I've got lots of articles I've written. There's actually 2 sections. Under the resources, you'll see articles I've written and books and all sorts of things. On the right side of my website, you'll see a blog, and you'll see more articles, more recent articles there. There is CHAD, as I mentioned. There's another website called understood.org, which is excellent. They have a lot of really good, reliable resources. There's attitudemagazine.com that has some webinars. In fact, if you send me your email, I'm happy to send you some links to some of the webinars that I've done on Attitude Magazine. My email address you'll see on the last slide. And I do have my parent coaching workshop series. I'm starting it all the time. I'm starting another one in a couple of weeks. It's a 7-session workshop series. You're welcome to just attend the first session and see if you want to join the rest of them. You can come in person. I do it nationally as an interactive live webinar. And I do have, as Pam mentioned at the very beginning, I do have my book, The 8 Keys to Parenting Children with ADHD, that has a lot of resources. So that brings us to the end of my formal presentation. I am happy to entertain any questions that anyone may have. Please feel free to reach out to me. As I said, my email is there, and if you email me, I'm happy to send you links to some of the other webinars that I've done.